All right, so we're diving deep today, folks, into Robert Greene's Laws of Human Nature. We're going to uncover those kind of hidden rules that make us tick.
Yeah, Green, he's got this amazing way of combining history, psychology, and even strategy. And the cool thing is, it's not just about understanding human nature, it's about, like, giving you the tools to navigate the world better.
Exactly. And we've got a YouTube video summarizing the book and even an audio discussion that really digs into the first 16 laws. So,
Yeah, it's a lot to unpack, but we're going to pull out the most insightful stuff, the stuff that's actually useful, you know?
absolutely. All right, let's start with Law 1. Master your emotional reactivity. Oh, man. This one hit me hard. Greene basically says those times where you're like, why did I do that? Those moments aren't just random.
Right. It's like there are these triggers, almost like reflexes. But the cool thing is, Green's not saying we should become like emotionless robots.
No, yeah.
It's about having a choice. Do you remember that Athenian general from the audio discussion? The one whose rage like literally cost them the battle?
Oh, yeah. Talk about a cautionary tale.
Mm.
And history's full of them.
Yeah.
It makes you wonder how many, like, fights, arguments, even wars could have been avoided if people just, like, took a second to figure out what was really driving their reaction.
And it's not just the big explosive stuff either. The audio source pointed out that even like subtle reactions, like shutting down emotionally, that can have a huge impact.
Yeah, that's so true. We might think we're being stoic or protecting ourselves, but those little cues, they still affect people. It's like we're sending a message even when we think we're being silent.
Totally.
Okay, let's shift gears. Law 2. Transform self-love into empathy. This one's tricky.
Yeah. It's not that self-love is bad.
Right.
It's more like Green's pointing out that when we get too caught up in ourselves, it's almost like this distortion field forms around us. We can't see other people's points of view.
That's such a good analogy. It's like we're trapped in our own little world. But what I thought was really interesting is that Greene says empathy isn't just about being nice.
Right. It's a skill, a strategic skill even.
Okay.
The audio source even mentioned that empathy can be a secret weapon in business negotiations. Like if you can truly get where the other person is coming from, even if you disagree, it opens up communication.
Yeah, it's about finding those win-win solutions.
Totally.
Okay, on to Law 3. See through people's masks. I feel like we all do this to some extent.
Yeah.
We all kind of present different versions of ourselves depending on who we're with.
Totally. It's like we're all wearing different masks.
Right.
And Green's like encouraging us to become students of human behavior, to try to figure out people's real motives.
Right.
It's not about being suspicious or cynical or anything. It's about seeing the whole picture.
Right.
And the source material pointed out some really helpful things to look for.
Okay.
Like, does their body language contradict what they're saying? How do they act when they're under pressure?
It's like those times when someone does something totally unexpected and you're like, wait, the signs were all there, I just didn't see them. Kind of scary, actually.
It can be. But Green's not trying to make us paranoid. He's trying to help us be more aware, more astute observers of human behavior, Speaking of observation, let's talk about Law 4. Determine the strength of people's character.
Oh, man, this one's so important these days. It's so easy to get caught up in appearances. But Greene reminds us that real character, it comes out in how we act, especially when things are tough. I love that example in the audio sort of the leader who stayed calm and in control during that crisis.
It's inspiring, right?
Yeah.
You can just feel the respect people have for someone like that. And it's not about being perfect or never messing up.
Right.
It's about how you handle those challenges, how you treat other people, and if your actions actually match your words.
Yeah. Makes you think about who you want in your corner,
Yeah.
Okay, brace yourselves. Law 5. Become an elusive object of desire. At first, this sounds kind of manipulative,
I know, right?
like playing games.
But it's not about that. Think about that first date analogy from the audio discussion. Like, imagine someone dumping their entire life story on you on the first date.
Oh, yeah. No thanks.
It's about pacing yourself, revealing yourself slowly, keeping a little bit of mystery, like what's more intriguing, a Wikipedia entry or a novel that unfolds chapter by chapter.
Good point. Okay, yeah, I'm starting to see it. It's about letting that attraction build naturally. Speaking of building, let's talk about Law 6. Elevate your perspective. I think we've all been there, feeling stuck in the day-to-day, just reacting to whatever's in front of us.
Oh, for sure. The audio source even mentioned this leader who made a short-sighted decision that ended up having, disastrous consequences down the road. It's a good reminder that we need to, zoom out sometimes,
Right, yeah.
think bigger picture.
It's easy to get caught up in putting out fires.
Yeah.
But Greene gives us some actual strategies for breaking out of that cycle, like seeking out different viewpoints to challenge our own assumptions,
Yeah.
and even just taking a moment to breathe before making a big decision.
Yeah, being proactive instead of reactive.
Right. Okay, let's talk about leadership. Law 7. Confirm your authority. This one's interesting because Greene has a different take on authority.
Yeah.
It's not about demanding it. It's about earning it, inspiring genuine respect.
Totally. And he talks about this combination of confidence, competence, and being able to manage your emotions. Like, no one wants to follow someone who's unsure of themselves or easily rattled.
And that goes back to Law 1, doesn't it? Emotional intelligence is so important, especially when it comes to leadership.
It all ties together for sure. And remember what Greene said about focusing on your strengths. Like, don't try to be good at everything. Figure out what you're really good at and make that your thing.
Yeah, there's something really attractive about authenticity, isn't there? All right, this next one sounds a little controversial. Law 8. Play to people's irrational side. I mean, we like to think of ourselves as rational beings, but emotions, they play such a huge role in our decisions.
Totally. But this isn't about like manipulation or anything. It's about understanding what really motivates people, on a deeper level. The audio source gave that example of like appealing to someone's empathy or their desire to be part of something bigger. It's more effective than just throwing facts at them.
It's like the power of storytelling. We remember stories way longer than we remember facts.
Absolutely.
Speaking of stories, Law 9. Create compelling spectacles. This one really stood out to me. In a world where we're just bombarded with information, you got to create something memorable to get people's attention.
Totally. Like, think about P.T. Barnum. The guy knew how to create a spectacle. He understood that to grab people's attention, you got to engage their senses, tell a story, and throw in a few surprises.
Yeah. And it's not just about entertainment, right? It's about communicating a message in a way that resonates emotionally. Like, think about how brands use spectacle to connect with their customers.
All the time. It can be a powerful tool for persuasion and influence. It's about creating experiences that move people.
For sure. Okay, this next one, Law 10. Think as you like, but behave like others. That sounds kind of contradictory, doesn't it?
Right.
Like, how can you be yourself and also conform?
Yeah, but
Yeah.
it's not about being fake. It's about understanding that different groups have different, norms and expectations. It's like when in Rome, ignoring those cues can lead to problems.
Right, so it's about finding that balance between being authentic and being sensitive to the situation.
Yeah, exactly. It's about knowing when to go with the flow and when to, challenge the status quo.
Speaking of knowing, Law 11. Know who you're dealing with is all about avoiding those snap judgments. We all do it, but it's so easy to misjudge someone based on, like, limited information.
Totally. It's like judging a book by its cover.
Ex-
But the thing is, we all have our own blind spots, our own biases. Greene's encouraging us to be more curious, ask questions, observe people in different situations before jumping to conclusions.
And to pay attention to those inconsistencies,
Yeah.
Don't just ignore them, try to figure out what's behind them.
Yeah.
Okay, Law 12. Recast your weaknesses into strengths. This one challenges the idea that weaknesses are always bad.
Totally. Greene sees weaknesses as like untapped potential. He wants us to challenge those negative beliefs we have about ourselves and find creative ways to use our so-called flaws.
That's such a good way to look at it. It's about turning what we see as negatives into opportunities to grow. Okay, let's talk about envy. Law 13. Beware the fragile ego. We've all felt it, right?
Yeah.
That twinge of insecurity or resentment when we compare ourselves to others.
Yeah, for sure. Greene gives some really good advice for dealing with our own envy. Focus on your own goals, celebrate your own wins, and be grateful for what you have.
So it's about shifting the focus inward. But what about those people who, like, thrive on envy? How do you deal with them?
Boundaries, boundaries, boundaries. Don't brag. Redirect the conversation and protect your energy from their negativity. Envy is just toxic for everyone.
Okay, let's talk about archetypes. Law 14. Find your character's archetype. I love this one.
Me too.
It's like those classic stories where the hero's fatal flaw brings about their downfall,
Yeah.
It makes me think about those tendencies we all have that can sabotage us. But it's not about judging them. It's about being aware of them so we can make better choices.
Exactly. Self-awareness is key.
Right. And speaking of knowing yourself, Law 15, know your limits. This one, it feels really freeing.
Yeah.
It's about being honest about who you are, what you're capable of, accepting your limitations instead of trying to be someone you're not.
It's about finding healthy ways to express yourself, even those parts of yourself that you might be afraid to acknowledge.
That's powerful stuff. Okay, we've reached the last law in this first set, and don't let the title scare you, Law 16. Redeem yourself by forging a new identity.
Yeah, it sounds intense, but it's actually about growth and transformation. Greene talks about those times when you realize you've outgrown a role or a belief system. It's like shedding an old skin and creating a new one. Those transitions can be tough, but they're also amazing opportunities to grow.
We've all had those moments where we look back and think, wow, I can't believe I used to be that person. It's like we're always evolving, shedding those old layers.
It's all about embracing those transitions, seeing them as adventures.
I love that. Okay. Wow, we just went deep into those first 16 laws, and I feel like I've got a whole new set of tools for understanding myself and the people around me.
It's amazing how it all comes together, isn't it? Like they're not just separate ideas, they're all connected.
Exactly. And I love how Greene doesn't shy away from the darker side of human nature. He really pushes us to face those shadows, both in ourselves and in others.
Yeah, for sure. And speaking of shadows, let's talk about Law 17, the law of generational myopia. This one's all about understanding the different perspectives and values that each generation brings to the table.
Okay, generational myopia. That sounds interesting. Tell me more.
So Greene argues that each generation develops a specific worldview, shaped by the time and the context they grew up in. Like, think about it. Someone who came of age during the Great Depression is going to have a very different outlook on life than someone who grew up in the digital age.
That makes total sense. Like, my grandparents were always talking about saving for a rainy day, while I'm more focused on experiences, living in the moment.
Exactly. And those different perspectives, they can sometimes lead to like misunderstandings, even conflicts. It's like each generation is looking through a different lens.
So it's not that one generation is right and the other is wrong. It's about recognizing that we all have our own filters based on our experiences.
Yeah, exactly. And the key is to like cultivate empathy and understanding, even when those generational divides feel really wide. Instead of dismissing someone else's point of view, try to see the world through their eyes.
It's about walking a mile in their shoes.
Exactly. Each generation has something to offer, and by bridging those gaps, we can learn from each other.
Yeah, creating a more harmonious world. I love that.
Now, get ready for this one. Law 18. The law of death denial.
Okay, death denial. This sounds intense. I'm ready.
All right. So Greene argues that, like, deep down, we humans have this instinct to avoid thinking about our own mortality.
Yep.
It's uncomfortable, scary even, so we tend to push those thoughts away.
Yeah, I get that. It's not exactly dinner party conversation.
Well,
But why is Greene saying death denial is a problem?
well, he thinks that by pretending death doesn't exist, we actually miss out on, like, the fullness of life.
That's an interesting way to look at it.
Yeah, like when we're constantly distracting ourselves from the fact that our time is limited, we get caught up in all the little things, the to-do lists, the superficial stuff. We lose sight of what truly matters.
So by accepting our mortality, we actually appreciate life more.
Exactly. When we acknowledge that our time is precious, we're more likely to make choices that align with our values, pursue our passions, and just really savor every moment.
It's about living with intention, right? Because we understand that time is a gift.
Exactly. It's a powerful shift in perspective.
Yeah, it is. Okay, those were some deep topics. Generational differences, our relationship with death, the power of perspective. It's a lot to think about.
It is, but they're important parts of the human experience.
Absolutely. And I'm already seeing how these laws can be applied to not just my interactions with other people, but to my own personal growth.
And that's really the point. It's not just about understanding human nature, but using that knowledge to create a more meaningful life.
All right, I'm feeling energized. What's next on our journey?
Well, remember how I said everything's connected?
Yeah.
I think it's time we circle back to some of the earlier laws, but this time with a new lens.
Sounds good to me. What are we revisiting?
Let's start with Law 1. Master your emotional reactivity. You remember, it's about understanding our triggers and choosing how we respond, instead of just reacting automatically.
Yeah, hit that pause button. I remember that Athenian general and his rage. Costly mistake.
Exactly. Emotions can have real consequences, not just for us, but for everyone around us. And it's not just the big blow-ups, remember. We talked about those subtle reactions too, like withdrawing. Those can be just as impactful.
Especially in close relationships, yeah. So how do we become masters of our emotions? What does Greene suggest?
Well, he says self-awareness is the first step. It's about noticing those patterns, those things that tend to trigger us, what sets you off. Once you know what those triggers are, you can start to figure out how to deal with them.
So it's like creating a map of our own emotional landscape. So instead of being swept away by those feelings, we can learn to navigate them.
Exactly. And sometimes it's as simple as taking a few deep breaths before you react or stepping away from the situation to cool down. It's about creating that space between the trigger and the reaction.
Giving ourselves a choice. I also remember Greene talking about reframing our perspective. Like instead of seeing something as a personal attack, can we step back and look at it more objectively?
Yeah, it's about detaching from the emotion of the moment and tapping into that wiser part of ourselves. It's not always easy, but it's a skill we can develop.
I'm sensing a theme here. Practice, practice, practice. It's like learning a new instrument or a language. It takes time and effort.
Totally.
Okay, so we revisited mastering our emotions. What other foundational law is calling to us?
Let's look back at Law 4. Determine the strength of people's character. It's about recognizing that true character shows itself through actions, especially when things get tough.
Remember that leader who handled that crisis with such grace? It was inspiring.
Wasn't it? It reminds us that we all have that potential to act with courage and kindness, even when things are falling apart around us.
And Greene gives us some really practical advice on how to assess character, doesn't he?
Yeah.
It's like we're becoming human nature detectives. How do they treat others, especially those who are less powerful? Do their actions match their words? How do they handle their own mistakes?
It's about paying attention to those little details.
Yeah.
You know, the things that reveal who someone really is. And it reminds us that we have a choice in who we surround ourselves with. We can choose to be around people who inspire us, who challenge us to be better.
So, circling back to these two laws, mastering our emotions and figuring out people's character, what's the key takeaway for our listeners today?
I think it's this. Understanding human nature isn't just an intellectual thing. It's about using that knowledge to build a better life, stronger relationships, and to navigate the world with more skill.
Yeah, it's a journey, right? We're always learning and growing.
Absolutely. The journey never ends.
And honestly, I wouldn't want it to. This has been an amazing deep dive into the laws of human nature. We've talked about emotional intelligence, the importance of character, generational differences, even our own mortality.
It's a lot to digest, but hopefully it's sparked your curiosity and given you a fresh perspective on yourself and the world.
Absolutely. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep. Okay, wow, we just went deep into those first 16 laws, and I feel like I've got a whole new set of tools for understanding myself and the people around me.
It's amazing how it all comes together, isn't it? Like they're not just separate ideas, they're all connected.
Exactly. And I love how Greene doesn't shy away from the darker side of human nature. He really pushes us to face those shadows, both in ourselves and in others.
Yeah, for sure. And speaking of shadows, let's talk about Law 17, the law of generational myopia. This one's all about understanding the different perspectives and values that each generation brings to the table.
Okay, generational myopia. That sounds interesting. Tell me more.
So Greene argues that each generation develops a specific worldview shaped by the time and the context they grew up in. Like, think about it. Someone who came of age during the Great Depression is going to have a very different outlook on life than someone who grew up in the digital age.
That makes total sense. Like, my grandparents are always talking about saving for a rainy day, while I'm more focused on experiences, living in the moment, you know?
Exactly. And those different perspectives, they can sometimes lead to, like, misunderstandings, even conflicts. It's like each generation is looking through a different lens.
So it's not that one generation is right and the other is wrong. It's about recognizing that we all have our own filters based on our experiences.
Yeah, exactly. And the key is to, like, cultivate empathy and understanding, even when those generational divides feel really wide. Instead of dismissing someone else's point of view, try to see the world through their eyes.
It's about walking a mile in their shoes.
Exactly. Each generation has something to offer, and by bridging those gaps, we can learn from each other.
Yeah, creating a more harmonious world. I love that.
Now, get ready for this one. Law 18, the law of death denial.
Okay, death denial. This sounds intense. I'm ready.
All right. So Green argues that, like, deep down, we humans have this instinct to avoid thinking about our own mortality.
Yeah.
It's uncomfortable, scary even, so we tend to push those thoughts away.
Yeah, I get that. It's not exactly dinner party conversation.
Yeah.
But why is Green saying death denial is a problem?
Well, he thinks that by pretending death doesn't exist, we actually miss out on, like, the fullness of life.
That's an interesting way to look at it.
Yeah, like when we're constantly distracting ourselves from the fact that our time is limited, we get caught up in all the little things, the to-do lists, the superficial stuff. We lose sight of what truly matters.
So by accepting our mortality, we actually appreciate life more.
Exactly. When we acknowledge that our time is precious, we're more likely to make choices that align with our values, pursue our passions, and just really savor every moment.
It's about living with intention, right?
Yeah.
Because we understand that time is a gift.
Exactly. It's a powerful shift in perspective.
Ooh, that was a lot. Generational myopia and death denial, those are heavy topics. But Green has such a way of, like, making these complex ideas really accessible.
He does, yeah. He blends history, psychology, philosophy. But it's interesting, we keep coming back to some of those earlier laws.
Yeah, you're right. It's like we're revisiting the same ground, but with a different perspective now. What do you think that means?
Maybe it's showing us how interconnected these laws are. They're not just separate things, they all work together. And maybe those recurring themes, those are like the foundation for really understanding and dealing with human nature.
I like that. Foundational elements. So which law are we circling back to now?
Well, let's revisit Law 1. Master your emotional reactivity. Remember, it's about understanding those triggers and having a choice in how we react, not just going with that knee-jerk response.
Yeah. Hit the pause button before we hit send, right? That Athenian general's rage from the audio. Classic example.
Oh, yeah, that's a good one. Reminds us that emotions can have real consequences. Not just for us, but for everyone around us. And it's not just those big outbursts, remember. Those little reactions, like shutting down emotionally, those matter too.
Totally, yeah. Especially in relationships. Like, even when we think we're being quiet, we're still sending a message. So how do we master those emotions? What does Green say?
Well, he says it starts with being self-aware, like noticing those patterns in yourself, those things that tend to set you off. What are your triggers? Once you know what they are, you can figure out how to handle them.
So it's like creating a map of our emotional landscape.
Yeah.
So instead of being like totally overwhelmed by those feelings, we can learn to navigate them.
That's a great way to put it. And sometimes it really is as simple as taking a few deep breaths before reacting, or just stepping away for a bit to calm down.
It's about making space, between the
Like
trigger and the reaction.
giving ourselves a choice. I also remember Green talking about reframing our perspective. Instead of seeing something as a personal attack, can we step back and see it objectively?
Totally. Detach from the emotion of the moment and tap into that calmer, wiser part of yourself. It's not easy, but it's a skill you can practice. I'm hearing that a lot. Practice, practice, practice. It really is like learning anything new, a new instrument, a new language. It takes time and effort.
Yeah, it does.
Okay, so we revisited mastering emotions. What other foundational law is calling our attention?
Let's look back at Law 4. Determine the strength of people's character. Remember, it's about seeing that true character reveals itself through action, especially when things are difficult.
Yeah, I remember that leader from the audio who handled that crisis with such grace. It was inspiring.
Right. Makes you realize that we all have that potential to act with courage and kindness, even when things are falling apart around us.
And Green gives us some concrete tips for how to judge character,
Right.
right? It's like we're becoming detectives of human nature.
Exactly.
How do they treat others, especially those who are less powerful?
Mm.
Do their actions match their words? How do they deal with their own mistakes?
It's about paying attention to those little things, those things that really show you who someone is. And it reminds us that we have a choice in who we spend our time with. We can choose to be around people who lift us up, who challenge us to be better.
That's a great point. So as we wrap up this deep dive into the laws of human nature, what's the key takeaway you want to leave our listeners with?
I think it's this. Understanding human nature isn't just an intellectual exercise. It's about using that knowledge to create a more fulfilling life, build stronger relationships, and navigate the world with more skill and awareness.
Absolutely. It's an ongoing journey. We're always learning and growing.
Yeah, the journey never really ends.
And that's a good thing, isn't it? This has been an incredible deep dive into the laws of human nature with Robert Greene. We explored emotional intelligence, the importance of character, generational gaps, and even our own mortality.
Phew.
Yeah, it's a lot to take in, but we hope it sparked your curiosity and given you a new way of looking at yourself and the world around you. Absolutely. Until next time, keep exploring, keep asking questions, and keep diving deep.